It's no wonder Australia, the US and UK have been shoring up defence ties, beating chests with multi-billion-dollar announcements about building nuclear-powered submarines. It's all about countering China's expansion, which at the moment seems to be progressing unhindered. Take what the communist regime is systematically dismantling in Hong Kong, for example. Democracy. The freewheeling spirit of the former British colony is being smashed into submission with brutal crackdowns, mass arrests, and the end of free speech. It's game over for pro-democracy activists, who are now faced with a stark choice: either back Beijing or be punished. Riding through rural America may be as far from the buzz and bustle of Hong Kong as it's possible to get. But it's a new life that Mark Clifford is getting used to. Fearing for his safety, this leading journalist and author has left his adopted city, never to return. You lived and worked in Hong Kong for almost 30 years. How would you describe what's happening there at the moment?
It's shocking. As bad as everybody thought that it could be, it's worse. Hundreds of people in jail, more than that arrested, and a national security law that is so vague, so uncertain that no one knows where the red lines are. What could get them thrown in prison? As a mainland Chinese official put it, it's a sword hanging over people's heads. No one knows when the sword's going to fall, why the sword might fall on a particular person. I mean, it's crazy.
That sword has been wielded for more than a year now, putting an end to street protests and piercing the heart of the fight for freedom. Beijing's draconian national security law has been used to lock up activists and crush dissent. In a matter of months, this once vibrant city has changed beyond recognition.
The ferocity, the viciousness, the violence with which the party is determined to, if they need to, wreck Hong Kong because they need to keep political control. That is what matters to them above anything else.
When you look back at that handover in 1997, it's pretty clear now that when China said nothing would change, it was lying.
Totally. It promised the people of Hong Kong that their way of life could remain unchanged for 50 years. Instead, they have thought police, they've got kindergarten kids goose-stepping, they have, fulsome displays of patriotism to the national flag. I mean, it's just revolting.
Not so long ago, Hong Kong was a gleaming beacon of freedom and the rule of law. Now, it's a place of fear and repression, where residents are urged to dob in neighbours and school kids are taught to look out for traitors. Even the publishers of children's books have been arrested, accused of inciting hatred against the government. You have chosen not to go back, not to return. What are you worried about?
Well, I didn't like seeing a man that I respect more than almost anyone in the world, and that's Jimmy Lai, manacled and thrown into prison, judged guilty before he'd had a trial.
Jimmy Lai is a billionaire media tycoon and one of Hong Kong's most respected figures. We spoke to him a year ago as he made a defiant last stand for democracy. The prospect of spending the rest of your life in jail, perhaps in a Chinese prison, wouldn't exactly thrill you.
Well, I'm not going to think about this. I'm not going to think about things that scares me. I'm staying here. I'm staying here till the end. If we go down together. We burn together. That's my promise to my people.
Mark Clifford says his great friend knew what was coming. As owner of Apple Daily, the last pro-democracy newspaper in the territory, Jimmy Lai was a powerful voice that Beijing had to silence. Accused of colluding with foreign forces, he faces life in prison.
They handcuff his hands behind his back. They manhandle him. They have the whole press there, and it's early in the morning. Then they essentially take him on a perp walk of the newsroom with 200 cops, right? 200 armed policemen, like they're raiding some terrorist cell. I mean, that was a shock. I was on the board of the parent company, Next Digital, and I realized as that week went on that I was the only director in Hong Kong who was not incarcerated.
What's Jimmy actually done wrong, apart from speaking up and supporting free speech?
Well, that's what's wrong, because he didn't buckle to the Chinese Communist Party. And if you're a totalitarian dictatorship, and you've got a guy like Xi Jinping at the top, you cannot have one person, you cannot have one Jimmy Lai, because if you don't hammer down Jimmy Lai, well, tomorrow there might be 10 Jimmy Lais. The day after there could be 100. I mean, that's the great fear of totalitarianism. You know, here we have people just rounded up off the streets. We have people arrested for holding up blank pieces of paper and being warned that that's a violation of the national security law. What kind of a place is that? Is that a free and civilized society? No.
1 million copies of the farewell edition of Apple Daily were printed, 10 times the normal number. They sold out within hours. Hong Kongers queued through the night in their thousands to get their hands on a copy, showing their support for a newspaper branded as traitorous. Apple Daily is no more. 8 of its executives and senior editors have been arrested. These days, anyone who rocks the boat can find themselves in serious trouble.
Fear, of course, can make you back off. But I'm looking at fear as a way to make you stronger, because you do not want to live in fear. And I haven't changed anything in terms of how I do business or how I speak. And if anything, I want to speak out even more.
Herbert Chow is an outspoken Hong Kong entrepreneur who started clothing brand Chicky Duck more than 30 years ago. An unapologetic supporter of democracy, there's no doubt he's a provocateur. A statue in his store pays homage to gas-masked democracy protesters, and his cartoony creations feature symbols of the protest movement. You know, that's a very dangerous stance to take.
I don't think so, because I've never broken the law. What I'm doing now is just speaking up and telling the world the truth. And if they decided to make something up to arrest a tiny little businessman, I think they have a heavier price to pay than myself ending up in prison.
In April, Herbert found himself blacklisted. A shipment of 10,000 Chicky Duck products was seized on the mainland, and the factory making them told not to take any more orders. They seized your products, your cartoon design, in China, and claimed that it was advocating violence. That's one mighty powerful duck, isn't it?
Exactly. It's quite stupid, actually. I mean, if you look at the patterns of those products that were being seized, I mean, they're actually very friendly cartoon characters, but the rationale they used was that we had some umbrellas on that blanket and the cushion, and the umbrellas happened to be yellow. So they don't like yellow umbrellas. So this is a country where yellow umbrellas, black T-shirts are now sensitive items. And as a businessman myself, it's hilarious.
So sensitive that Herbert's shop was then raided by police, who viewed his products as a threat to national security.
They're trying to tell me that you little business merchant, shut up, stop selling these products, or we'll have more on you.
It appears to me they're tightening the screws on everybody in Hong Kong, especially people like you, to make them more fearful, to make them think twice about what they will say.
But their job is very difficult, Lam, you know, because we are the majority. They want to tell people that the national security law is just targeted at the minority. But in actual fact, they are the minority themselves. We are the majority. I'm part of the 6 million people who are dissatisfied and unhappy about what's going on in Hong Kong.
I think it's fantastically brave of you to keep speaking up, but I would also be worried if I was in your shoes. You could very easily end up in a cell next to Jimmy Lai.
I tend not to think in this direction. I will just follow the way of living according to the law that I understand. We'll cross the bridge when we get there. But for the time being, nothing's going to change.
But for many, the only choice has been to flee, not knowing when or if they might be able to return.
Perhaps I might not be able to go home at all in my lifetime. It's a very, very heavy decision.
Speaking out about what is happening right now in Hong Kong can be a dangerous business, especially if you're part of the younger generation that formed the bulk of the now silent democracy protests. Which is why Alexis has chosen to conceal her real name and her identity.
I think in Hong Kong I feel a bit unsafe because every day we're facing a lot of different restrictions or unknown red lines. We never know the red lines, when will it move up or move down.
So the red line is the limit of what you can say or do before what the government steps in and says, that's it, you're our enemy.
Yeah, exactly. The red line is moving and nobody can tell us what will happen at the next moment. Makes me feel scared because I'm not sure whether I will offend a government or not.
There's a petrol bomb. The police firing back non-lethal weapons. Tear gas. All in the name of democracy.
The last time we were in the busy district of Tsuen Wan, it was more like a battlefield than a shopping precinct.
You've got to ask yourself, how much longer can the Chinese government allow this to happen? There has to be some sort of breaking point.
There they go, they're going.
These days, outwardly at least, it's back to its old bustling self. But for Alexis, and so many like her, life here has changed beyond recognition. Born in 1997, the year of handover, she's part of what's known as the cursed generation. Young people who've known nothing but turmoil.
We're just being cursed for being ourselves, and we cannot be who we really are.
You and your friends went to a lot of those protests back in 2019. Do you think we will ever see those sort of protests again on the streets?
I think next time, if everyone head on to the streets for protests, for expressing themselves, that would be a bigger thing than civil disobedience.
So if we ever see people come back to the streets, it will be the full Monty, a fully fledged riot.
Yes, it will become much bigger and more violent than the protests that we have seen in 2019.
Like tens of thousands of Hong Kongers, Alexis isn't waiting around to see what happens. She's getting ready to tear herself away from her family to begin a new life in Britain.
I'm planning to go to the UK because I think they have more freedom over there and I can be myself rather being cursed by different political events and cursed by the Communist Party.
Is there a risk that you could get stopped at the airport?
There may be a risk because I've attended protests before, so I'll never be safe until I get on the plane and depart from Hong Kong.
Hong Kong's exodus is evident in the airport's departure halls. 1,500 people have been leaving every day. In fast-tracking citizenship for the people of Hong Kong, Britain expects 300,000 to resettle there in the next 3 years. So your mum and dad, your parents, are encouraging you to go, even though they don't want you to go.
Exactly. It's a very strong dilemma. They say, Alexis, I know it's difficult, but there won't be a future in Hong Kong, and the Communist Party will keep on invading your own rights and privacy. And that's simply, we don't want our grandchildren to be born here or grow up here. If you leave later, it will be too late. So better take the chance now and stay away from Hong Kong.
As we speak at this point in time, do you think Beijing has total control over Hong Kong?
I believe so, totally. I think it's self-evident that Hong Kong is just a normal Chinese city without any freedom.
Ted Hui feels like a stranger in a strange land, a pro-democracy politician who's now a fugitive in exile in Australia. Ted stood up to the destruction of Hong Kong's freedoms face on. A leading figure in protests on the streets, and in Hong Kong's legislature, he's been arrested many times. At the time you left, you were on bail, weren't you?
That's correct. I was on bail for 9 criminal charges.
So what would happen if you went back to Hong Kong tomorrow?
Tomorrow, of course, I would be arrested right at the border immediately, without any doubt, for national security charges, and I'll be locked up for years or decades or for life.
Ted made it to Denmark under the guise of speaking at an environmental conference before ending up in Adelaide. He's one of the few pro-democracy activists to make it out with his family. What does your wife and your children think about being here in Australia, having a new home?
So it's stressful and it's miserable in a way, knowing that they might never come back home to Hong Kong anymore. Like me, they left with a heavy heart, knowing that it's the last goodbye.
You still have extended family there. Are you worried for any of them?
I actually asked them not to talk to anyone about me, that they are my relatives, and just treat me as a stranger so that they can be safe.
Ted is continuing the fight for freedom from overseas, determined to keep up the pressure on Hong Kong's masters however he can.
I still believe that the Beijing and the CCP regime is afraid of the movement. It's afraid of the people rising, and it's afraid of us taking control.
But they're not afraid anymore, are they, Ted? That's why they're throwing everyone in jail.
I wouldn't say so. I think they are terrified. That's why the only thing they can do is to take us all to jail. Now they don't talk of winning people's heart. They talk of locking up people and shooting people and beating up people because they are afraid.
An ominous sign of what awaits came at the end of the first of many trials of those charged under the national security law. Tong Ying Kit was found guilty of incitement to secession and terrorism after his motorcycle struck police while flying a flag with a pro-Hong Kong slogan. He was jailed for 9 years, sending out a clear signal that the communist regime is not to be messed with.
It would rather be loved than feared, but if fear is what works, that's what it wants. Above all, it wants people to toe the line. I think the real question for Hong Kong is whether or not you can have a prosperous city, an international financial city, without the free flow of information. China's betting that it can, and we'll see.
Well, what do you think? I mean, what's the destiny? Is it going to turn out to be just like any other Chinese city?
Hong Kong, I think, is not going to become just another Chinese city. It's going to be a high surveillance, a techno-surveillance kind of city with an enormous amount of militarized control by security authorities.
It may seem like it's game over, but the people of Hong Kong have shown in the past that they aren't easily cowed. Whatever happens next, journalist Mark Clifford believes the communist regime still has a fight on its hands. Do you think that incredible defiance and passion that we witnessed on the streets of Hong Kong has been beaten out of those protesters by the Communist Party?
No, I think that sense of defiance is inside apartment buildings now, and it's inside jails. As long as there is resistance, there's hope. It would defy history for a totalitarian state to indefinitely stay in power, and I think people in Hong Kong know that.
In some good news for the young woman, Alexis, who was trying to get out of Hong Kong, well, she has been successful and is now safely in Britain.
Hello, I'm Sarah Arbo. Thanks for watching 60 Minutes Australia. Subscribe to our channel now for brand new stories and exclusive clips every week. And don't miss out on our Extra Minutes segments and full episodes of 60 Minutes on 9now.com.au and the 9Now app.